Hi, I'm Steve Strobridge,
And I'm Phil Odom.
and we're from MOAA's Government Relations Department, and this is MOAA Focus. This is another in a series of videos on the President's Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform, the Deficit Commission, and today we're going to be looking at the deficit. You know, how did we get to where we are? Deficit is $13 trillion. You know, it's kind of, that obviously didn't happen overnight.
No,
How did we get here?
sure didn't. It's years and years of spending more than we're taking in as revenues in the federal budget. In fact, in 2010, we spent 68% more money than we took in. And it's Congress not being able to say no to programs and requirements and express concerns of the public.
Well, and of course, we're all part of that. You know, Congress acts the way they do because they're afraid of what their constituents are going to vote them out. And Americans don't like to pay taxes, and Americans like, you know, to get money spent on them. That's why Congress proposes pork, because they're bringing jobs home to the state. And we've almost become inured to say, you know, the solution to any problem is, you know, some new tax cut, and the difference in the amount the government spends and the government takes in gets wider and wider apart, and so the deficit grows every year.
Well, we've been operating for 10 years in operational combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, all on borrowed money.
Yeah, this is the first war we ever had where we fought 2 wars and cut taxes. You know, we've never done that before. And that's compounded because right when we're getting this rising deficit, we run into the circumstance where we have a national economic meltdown.
Almost certainly did.
And all of a sudden, you know, whether it's the Bush administration or the Obama administration, both of them saw that unless the government took action, we're at risk of going back to a recession, back to like we did in the 1930s, having a total government meltdown. And so, like it or not, the government was in a position of having to bail out some of these companies, and the banks, the auto industry. You know, we may, you know, quibble about what was right and what was wrong, but at the time those decisions were made, people were really worried about going back to the 1930s and having red lines and having banks fail across the country. Those were big threats. That's kind of receded now, so we don't think about it that much, but we see the impact on the deficit, and you've done some stats on what happened to the deficit just in the last 2 years.
We've seen a 50% rise between 2008 and 2010 in terms of the deficit.
So two years ago, the deficit was 40% of the gross domestic product, all the value of all the goods and services produced in the country. 2010, it's 62%. You know, Greece just failed. They're talking about being about 108%. And when the economists, the Congressional Budget Office projects where we're going, they say we could be at 160% in 20 years. So that's the kind of crisis we're worried about.
Right.
It's that reason and Congress's inability to deal with that caused the President and Congress to agree we need this fiscal commission. And unfortunately, the medicine we're going to have to take is probably going to be pretty bitter, and we're going to find out about it, if there are recommendations, in December.
In December.
And the next one we'll be talking about what kinds of things are they likely to recommend.